Well, I want to thank you for joining us. You always have the most interesting projects, and the next film that is coming out January 26th, Between Borders. I want to get into the synopsis, but before we go there, what was it about the script, about the film that made you want to take part in this project?
Yeah, I was approached by Isaac Norris, who is the producer on it, but also it's about, I mean, his parents were the American, or at least his father was the American missionary that the Petrosian family met. So he's close friends with all of them and knows their story very well. And when he approached me about it, he mentioned that it's about an Armenian family that come to America as refugees. And I've been wanting to help tell an Armenian story for a really long time. I'm part Armenian myself. And when I read the script, I saw so much of my family members in it, especially the character that I play, Violetta. I saw my grandmother and my great grandmother in her. And it seemed like a very timely piece and also a really important piece. So I was very excited.
Yeah, and hearing that, you're part Armenian. I mean, this has been, and I think a lot of people have no idea because there's so much going on in the world, and really the persecution the Armenians have faced and gone through and dealt with, which obviously this film deals with a lot of that. And the film is obviously set on a story that happened in the 1980s, but as we speak, Nagorno-Karabakh, which is a land where Armenians, really a nation where Armenians were living, they have been completely driven out by Azerbaijan. And we won't get into all the intricacies of this, but the persecution of the people living there has been very real and very recent. And we've covered that a lot at CBN News. And so it's been eye-opening for me not knowing a lot of that before going into covering those stories. So let's get into this particular story. Violetta and the family. Tell us a little bit about the premise of Between Borders, what viewers will have a chance to experience.
Yeah, it starts in the late 80s. The Petrosian family, it's Yvonne and Violet and their two daughters. And they were born and raised in Baku in Azerbaijan. Um, they have incredible jobs. Yvonne is a rocket scientist, and Violetta is a principal at a school, and their families are there. They grew up there. That is their home. And very quickly, cultural tensions escalate to such a degree that they're not safe there anymore. They witness their neighbors getting killed, and like they know that like it's now or never. You have to flee now, and so they go to Volgograd, Russia. They are allowed to stay there by the government, but even within that, they are faced with a lot of bullying and threats and sort of this constant promise of danger to their family. And even though they're allowed to stay there, it's not home for them, and they don't really ever feel safe there. And um, and then they meet these missionaries from America that have started a church in Volgograd, and they kind of, they were raised in a communist society, so religion is a very foreign concept to them, and they kind of open their hearts to it and learn more about it, and it really transforms their lives. And then because of that, they're sort of invited to America to share their story. And through that experience, they apply for citizenship to America. So the whole thing's framed within this court hearing. And we get all these flashbacks to what they went through. And knowing them and getting to meet them while we're filming, while we were in Romania, was such a pleasure and privilege to get to see who they have become. And they're incredible, warm, loving people. It's a really happy ending. The
Yeah,
story.
well, I mean, yeah, what an incredible ending and yet a difficult journey. And it's interesting because you have done a number of projects now, obviously The Chosen and this, where you're dealing with real life people who you're playing. Now, obviously, in the case of The Chosen, you don't get a chance to meet those people outside of seeing them through scripture, right? But in this case, having a chance to meet the family, does that add pressure as an actor? Does it take pressure away? It's interesting to me to kind of hear the process of what that's like to take that person and bring them to the big screen?
Yeah, I when I read the script, I saw so much of my own family in it that I think that started to really develop the character. And they also shared home videos of them while they were, I believe, while they were in Russia. So I had these little clips, and they reminded me so much of my own family. And so I developed it based off of that. And then when we go, to film, and then actually meeting them after I've sort of developed this character, yeah, there's some similarities and differences and everything. And I realized that, like, it's just so much more important, kind of like for Mary Magdalene, it's so much more important to capture someone's spirit and someone's heart, and their drive and their priorities, than it is to try to imitate them or try to talk exactly like them or gesture exactly like them. That's all fun to do, but the most important thing is I think showing their heart.
Yeah, no, and I think that's true too, because if you obsess too much over replicating something, you could actually miss some of the heart, right? You could miss some. I can't imagine the pressure of that. So that's incredible. Now, obviously, with your own background and looking at what you already knew coming into this, what new information did you learn? How did it challenge you? I mean, this is heavy subject matter, and even though, again, you're taking a story that started a couple decades ago, these are very real stories for people right now, actually, they're going through this, Armenian. So what was that like? What did you learn?
Yeah, I feel, the Armenian people in my family, I think, have had uh, some lucky outcomes. My grandmother grew up in Tehran, and they traveled around a lot, and grew up in Australia as well. So there was like a lot of traveling. The tragic moments for the Armenian people, my grandmother and great grandmother escaped that time period and that those circumstances. So there's a lot of gratitude in that, and recognizing that not all Armenians have been so lucky. At the same time, they've also always been foreigners. Everywhere they go, they are foreigners. Um, and so you see it when you go to, I mean, we premiered this at the Armenian Film Festival in LA, in Glendale. And, the audience is full of Armenians, and you just feel this, like, there may be displacement, but there's such a connection and such a community amongst Armenians that is so beautiful to be a part of and to witness. Um, that yeah, that no matter where they are in the world, there's this, I think, a beautiful heart in them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what an incredible story to be able to tell. What did, as you reflected, because it's one thing to hear the stories and to see family and to be around and even to read about the things that the Armenians and others have gone through. How did it change or maybe illuminate your thoughts on desperation, right? As a concept, a very real concept, that when people are truly desperate to leave a situation, I mean, I'd love for you to reflect on that a little bit, because that's part of the human condition for everyone to varying degrees and different levels.
Yeah. I mean, this story, when we first meet Ivan and Violetta, they have these incredible jobs. They are so secure in their life. And you just see how quickly that can all completely change, and how quickly that can be taken away from you, based on hatred, based on aggression, based on racism. And so it's tragic to witness that happen so quickly, and so um and systematically. um and and I just, throughout the entire film, you just see these two people doing absolutely anything they can to make sure their girls are okay, to make sure that their daughters will have a good life. And they're, like, throwing away their ego, they're throwing away their status, they're throwing, like, their house, their money, like, everything is gone. And it's just to make sure that their family is going to be okay. And I think there's a certain type of desperation that sometimes is necessary to see what's truly important. And I think that's the place where they meet these missionaries. That's the place where they meet God. That's where they get to learn about who Jesus is, and what what sort of transformations come from their life through that. Um, and it's such an unfortunate thing to have to go through so much trauma and tragedy. Um, but there is this beautiful light at the end of that. There's this beautiful meaning behind it all, that like they gave up everything for their family and for love, and there is this like rich reward for them. Um, and you see the light of that love shine through them when you meet them, when you see them today. And um, I think desperation is part of everyone's journey, and everyone experiences it in different ways. Sometimes it's a necessary part of the journey.
Yeah, sometimes it's what teaches us the most, right? I think a lot of times when we go through those difficult moments, everything I've ever learned has been after a really difficult moment or a challenge in some way. And I think, you see that in stories like this, and audiences will be able to watch Between Borders January 26th to 28th in theaters. One more big question for you. Last time we spoke, I was at Chosen Con, actually, which was crazy. I've never experienced anything like that. A really, really good time. But hearing your faith journey, and you sort of, coming into a deeper faith amid the chosen, not to oversimplify the journey, but how has that, sort of newfound deeper journey with Jesus and Christianity and faith impacted the types of projects you take, the types of storytelling you want to do in your career?
Yeah. I mean, I think there have been offers for roles, and some of them are faith-based and some of them are not. And I don't think that like faith-based media is necessarily like, oh, I must do this now, this is what it has to be. But I do feel moved by certain stories, and I do feel moved by certain characters. And there are certain stories and narratives that I think the world needs and it would really benefit from. And so I'm always really excited to get to help in telling those stories like this one. I think the world needs some tenderness and some love, and any sort of story that can do that without being preachy, without turning people away or being exclusive about these messages is really important. And I think sometimes storytelling has to go kind of dark and challenging and tragic in order to highlight what is good in the world and what is good, and transformative and meaningful. So, in terms of like, I only do faith-based stuff, like that's not necessarily true, but I do think I my goal, my mission is to help tell, stories that uplift and make people feel less alone in their struggles.
Yeah, no, I love that. And, I think in the faith and family friendly genre, which I don't even know I think eventually it's just going to be like, these are the types of movies that people make, just like anything else, right? I think that getting to the darker, tougher content, we're just starting to see people do that more, and they're willing to go there. I think there was a real fear to do that because the audience expected one thing, and that one thing is fine. Those are great films, but you have to do other things too. And so I'm actually really interested to see what comes next in the space, right? Because every time I see a new project, I'm really inspired by it. And I think, wow, that was different. That got me thinking. And maybe it wasn't good for my kids to watch, and that's okay. It was good for me to watch, and it brought me to a better place, right?
It's an interesting concept that for whatever reason, we've combined faith-based and family-friendly. And those are actually, they can have overlap, but those are two separate things. And I think sometimes people are needing faith-based content that speaks to them directly at where they're at. And that isn't always family friendly, and that's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Some of the best stories of people leaving certain difficult scenarios that they're in and coming out and finding faith, if you want to tell those stories, those are not going to be stories that kids could watch necessarily, right? So I think I'm intrigued to see what comes next, and I'm very excited for this film, Between Borders. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Always lovely chatting with you.